Moving right along with the everyday BEETZ model, the next letter is a T. So we've had brokering, embeddedness, experimentation, and now the T stands for what I refer to as the targeting of high doses. And this one, the language is a little bit harder to make sense of initially, but my purpose here in this video is to explain what I mean by that, by the targeting of high doses, and how that fits together with the rest of the elements of this model, particularly as we talk about coaching. Again, this is an example of an everyday practice, something that as a coach or as those who work with coaches, that we think about as part of our everyday work, not as a kind of something we do a couple times a year or some big kind of strategic plan. Rather, it's how we think about what we do each day in our daily kind of routines. There's actually a sociological term called the term is dosage, which we often, when we hear the word dosage, we think of like medicine often. We think about, you're sick or you have an injury and the doctor gives you a dose of a medicine. In kind of social science, if we talk about something as a high dose behavior, for example, or a high dose treatment, it's kind of the same logic. It's something that happens a lot, like at a high frequency. So the pictures on the screen of things like daily routines that we have when we we wash our hands in the wintertime. I'm constantly washing my hands because I'm paranoid of getting germs and getting sick, so I'm constantly washing my hands. So that's an example of kind of like a high dose behavior, something I'm doing all the time. I may not even really be thinking about it a lot, but it's something I'm doing all the time. You could say the same about kind of like interactions you have with people. For example, I know in some offices, every day you will walk into the office and you'll walk past the same person and you'll have a brief exchange with that same person. It's a high dose thing, something that happens every day, happens a whole lot. You may not think a lot about it, but over time it's something that you get a high dosage of. So in that kind of sociological literature, we often talk about how these high dose things are, like I've talked about previously on the other side, they're unnoticed. They're things that we don't even realize are happening, these high dosage things. So when I say targeting high doses as a coach, what I'm referring to as, and what our research over the last 10 years has shown, is that there are a lot of these everyday things, these kind of things that we do very often as coaches that we don't think a lot about, and that some of the best coaches that we've studied are those that are very purposeful about those high dosage things that others may view as kind of like, kind of in between time or not important stuff. I want to give a couple examples. First of all, from some of the kind of sociological studies, and then I want to tie them directly to coaching. So this is a picture here. If any of you any of you watching this have little children, or if you have a little sibling or anyone who's been in preschool or even like a younger elementary age child, it's like a coat room of a school. And if you think about a coat room, it's a place where I've had 4 kids go through preschool over the last 15 years and spent a lot of time in coat rooms. When you bring a kid in to preschool, you drop them off and you get their coat off, you hang up their bag, and you take their boots off if they have boots on, and you get them ready to go into the classroom. And that's the basic thing that happened in the coat room. But there was one interesting study of certain schools and certain like child care centers, and it talked about like how some school leaders were really strategic about the coat room and what they did in there, and that they could make that place more than just a place you dropped off your bag. It could be a place where maybe the parent was in there and the parent could every day have an interaction with other parents, or a place where a parent might interact with a teacher for just like 1 minute or 2 minutes. And they can be very purposeful about making sure that those interactions occur in the coat room, because if they didn't happen there, they wouldn't happen anywhere else. Another example in some of these studies was that in some of these coat rooms, the teachers or the leaders in the schools would put information on the walls about things that parents needed to know about, about the school schedule, or about after school opportunities, about all kinds of things. And the reason that they focus on the coat room was because it's an example of a high dosage place. It's a place where people are constantly passing in and out, and they're there with great frequency. They're at least twice a day as a parent. They're coming in to drop a child off and going back in to pick them up. Teachers, kids, parents, everyone is coming through that space at a great frequency. So it's an example of a high dosage space. I want to give an example of a study that I did a couple of years ago, in which I focused on some schools, and we were looking at high dosage things. We were looking at a number of things, but I want to share an example, something that was really kind of interesting to me that we learned. An average school year, like for example in Wisconsin, is about 180 school days in a school year, and each school day is almost 7 hours, just short of 7 hours. So in a given school year, that's 1,242 hours that kids are in school, and often, I work in a school of education. When we are talking about really good teachers or really good leaders, what are we focusing on? Like, if you think about the best teachers you've had over the years. Everyone has had teachers. Everyone's had some really bad teachers, some really good teachers, a lot of teachers in between. If you think about, let's think about the teachers that you've had. Just kind of reflect back. It could have been, when you were in first grade. It could have been when you were in high school, or maybe even in college. But I'm talking more about when we're younger. Let's think about the teachers who are on the end of the best ones, and those who are on the end of the worst ones. And often, we think about the way they taught. We think about what happened in the classroom. We think about, like, if they taught math, like how they taught math. But we also think about other things when we think about those teachers. Sometimes we think about what happened kind of before, between, and after class. We think about those kind of gap times. How did they interact with us before class or after class? What did they do during those times? And that's sometimes where they showed themselves to be so special or so effective, or on the other hand, to be ineffective. And I want to give you a particular example. I was studying one school, and the topic that I had been focusing on at this point, this was a few years ago, was student homelessness. And we were trying to figure out, what is it that teachers and kind of principals and people in schools do to help kids? Who are what teachers are most effective in helping kids who are experiencing that? And what made them so good? And there was one school that I ended up spending a lot of time in, and we were studying this school because there was a couple of teachers that appeared to be, by a number of data, really, really good at doing that. And I remember this one teacher. This is someone I'll never forget. And he was a teacher. He was a kindergarten teacher, and the principal said that we send a lot of our most difficult, a lot of our kids who have the most difficult things in their lives. We put them in his class. And this teacher, his name was Mr. Martin, and he said, we send a lot of them there. And you need to just go watch Mr. Martin. You need to just go watch his class and learn from him and spend time around him, because he's the one who helps kids the most when they're having a lot of hard things happening. And so I did that. I started spending time in this teacher's room. He's a kindergarten teacher. And for the first number of observations I did, the time I was there, I was really watching him teach, and they were doing everything that kindergartners, everything from like coloring to learning the alphabet to some of them starting to read, doing basic math stuff. And to be honest, like a lot of his instruction, it was just fine. It was okay. It didn't knock me out. I wasn't blown away by his instructional strategy. He was fine, nothing exceptional. But then I started noticing these things that I just talked about, the before, between, and after, and that's where Mr. Martin was really kind of. Once I got keyed into it, I realized that was where he excelled, and that was where he was really, actually pretty amazing. And I'd say a couple of things about that. So one was, if you think back to, I don't know if you can remember when you were in kindergarten or if you've been around kindergartners at all, but one at this school, and I think in most schools, kindergartners line up a lot. They're always getting in lines. They line up to go to the bathroom. They line up to go to recess. They line up to go to lunch, to the cafeteria. They line up to go to art class. They're always getting in lines at the door of their room, and then they go to the place. And then when they go back to the room, they're getting in line again. So there's always these lines, and it's something that actually once you start paying attention to in a school is really interesting. And Mr. Martin, one of the things he did so well was he ran an amazing line. These kindergartners, it was the best line you ever saw, and I'll give you a couple of reasons why. One was when every time they lined up, there were 15 to 20 kids in this class. And whereas most lines in other classes, the kids were kind of, the teacher was shushing the kids and the kids were kind of being rowdy, or just being what kindergartners do. Mr. Martin, his classroom his line was pretty quiet, and one of the reasons was that every time they lined up to go somewhere, he taught them American Sign Language. He would teach them, like one day he would teach them a letter, then the next day another letter, and they would learn a different letter or a different word every day. So they would literally be walking through the school, and all the kids would be looking at him, and as they're walking through the school, he would be, I don't know sign language myself, so I can't do the example, but he would be showing them how this is how you do this word, this is how you do this letter. And so like the kids were they were learning as they're walking to the bathroom. But not only that, they were keyed into him, and they were learning something, but they were kind of focused, and they were all kind of a unit together. You could tell they all really enjoyed it, and they felt proud that theirs was the only room that was learning this. So that was a pretty cool thing that I got to watch a bunch of kindergartners learning that. Then another thing that he did that struck me at first as being kind of, again, like a little unusual at first, like every time he dropped this group of kids off at, say, the lunchroom, he would take them to their table. He'd walk them all down there, all these kindergartners with their lunch, or they'd go through the line, and he would always say, he would say to the whole group, "I love you," before he dropped them off. And then he would do it again when we went to art class. He would do it when they went to recess. And so, again, that struck me as, like, I never had a teacher do that for me. It seemed a little, like, just different, unusual to me at first. I actually thought it was a little weird at first. But then I started to really key into it more. And I started realizing why he was doing it. And he actually talked about it a little bit. And it was that, a lot of the kids in his class, he knew what they were dealing with at home, and he knew that a lot of the kids didn't know what they were going to go home to. They didn't literally, some of them didn't know where they were going after school. They didn't know, everything outside of school for a lot of the kids was very unsettled, and it wasn't necessarily a happy place they were going back to. And so he said, the most important thing I do is I let them know that someone is there for them every day and someone loves them. And so I started actually to be pretty moved by that, and to see that that meant something to the kids. And I even I did the math on it a little bit. And so if you think about, I started averaging it out, and the kids got in line on average about 11 times a day. And then there's 180 school days, so almost 2,000 times that school year, Mr. Martin told this little group of kindergartners that he loved them. And again, that seems like kind of a silly thing in some ways, but and maybe a minor thing to a lot of us when we hear that. But the thing about that is that again, a lot of those kids didn't hear that anywhere else. And then the other thing is that for a lot of those kids, one of the things about being homeless is kids were missing a lot of school. They would, the rides didn't work out or whatever happened. So kids were missing on average like 4 weeks of school a year. So, on average, I think that was about 4 weeks of school. And I even computed that was like over 200 times. They were missing about over 200 I love yous when they were missing school. And so that was like a big deal for them, and that they knew that if they missed school, they were missing learning math, and they were missing, whatever, recess, but really also they were missing Mr. Martin. They were missing this like stable presence in their lives. And the way he did that was by targeting high doses. He took this thing that happened a lot in the day, the lineup, the school line, that most teachers, I'll include myself, I used to be a teacher. Well, I taught high school, so we didn't get in lines, but I had a lot of parts of school, like of high school, before class, after class. I didn't give much thought. I thought about the instruction period. I thought about the 50 minutes kids were in my class. And the same when I was a coach. I would always make a practice plan for 3:30 p.m. until 5:30 p.m. and it would be to the minute. I would schedule that. But I don't know that I was paying as much attention to the before, between, and after like Mr. Martin did. And these high doses, targeting the high doses that he did. And he was a real master of the way he did that. And part of the logic of that, in his case, was that if you look at like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like if you don't have those basic needs met in any group, in a school, on a team, and that means the bottom two levels, and that includes like the safety and the kind of feeling of belonging, those bottom levels. You can't get to those highest levels, and I mean even at like a college level, if a student athlete doesn't know that he or she is cared for by a coach, and I don't mean that in the same way I'm talking about like Mr. Martin. Obviously, kindergartners are handled differently than college athletes, but if you don't have a way of showing care or of kind of demonstrating the purpose of what you're doing, then some of these higher level things that we aim for, the high level skills, they can be very difficult to get to that. It can be very difficult to get that top of the triangle if we don't first kind of establish the lower levels. And again, I'm going to be very clear that I understand that I have been a part of athletics at different levels, including like collegiate levels, and done a lot of work with people at kind of professional levels as well. And I understand that you work very differently than you do obviously with kindergartners, than you do with higher level athletes, but still that need to show caring is necessary, and I think sometimes we forget that. And so one way to do that is to target high doses. So a question, like a reflection question you can ask, is like, using the example I just shared, what are the kindergarten lines for coaches? What I mean by that is what are kind of these high dose things that might be right in front of our eyes that we don't think about, we don't address them because we think that they're not like important. You could probably think about some in your own past, or you might think of some in your present situation that could be made better. And some of these are simple, like very simple things that we could think about. The second question is like, how might these high dosage items be improved for the betterment of the team? So I'm not just talking here about making everybody feel good and just making everybody feel happy and accepted. That's important, but ultimately I'm aware that at the end of the day, especially when you're a college or professional coach, you got to win. Like, you got to be successful. You got to get your team to perform at a high level. So these things actually, these high dosage things are actually, we've found in working with a lot of coaches, they're associated with that. Some of the coaches that I tend to talk about a lot in my work, in, whether they're in the NBA or in other levels, are coaches that do these things really well. I've shared before about Monty Williams. Monty Williams was an NBA player for a number of years, and an NBA head coach, is currently an assistant coach with the Philadelphia 76ers. And this quote, he's talking about what he missed most about not playing anymore. He missed the locker room, the bus, the airplane. Those are the things, he said, that made us like a fist. He meant like those are the things that brought us together. And he uses the term here that we often think about those as like secondary or tertiary things, like things that are like, oh, by the way, this is what it was like on the bus. But those are the things you remember. Like, and he was my teammate. I was teammates with him, and so when I think about him, when I think about Monty, before he was a coach, long before that, before he was an NBA player, when he was a college player, this is what I remember about him. I remember walking through the airport with him, and I remember what it was like, the way he was as a teammate to me. I remember some very specific conversations that I had with him in which he was very good to me, and he made me feel better, and he made me feel more confident. He made me believe in myself in the airport. I don't remember much about on the court with him. I remember much more about these kind of locker room, bus, airplane things. So, when I ask what are the kindergarten lines for coaches, this is kind of what I'm getting at. Like, how could you make the locker room better? How could you make the bus rides? Like, what goes on the bus ride? What about the airplane? What about a number of other places? And give some examples. So there's the locker room, obviously. We've talked about, the geography of the locker room makes a difference, but so too does like what happens in the locker room. Another spot that's important is if you think about like where do we talk to athletes? The huddle. What does the huddle look like? How is it laid out? Who sits where? How does communication happen? Like in a conversation on your team, whether it's in competition, regardless of what sport you're in, So if it always looks like this, then maybe that's not right. Maybe if instruction is always delivered in a certain way, we're not thinking about our high doses well enough. Maybe our office is a place where certain conversations can be made better. Maybe it's a place where we could move the way it's laid out. Maybe we can invite different groups of people into the office in high doses, and to be smart about that. One coach my last example here, who is really interesting to read about regarding some of the stuff, was Pat Summitt, the former women's coach at Tennessee, the legendary coach. And she had her, like, all of her strategies and great things she did as a coach strategically and in every way, just a legendary coach, Pat Summitt. But some of the things that struck me most in reading about her work were that she would regularly talk to her players about eye contact and about the importance of eye contact, not just in like their conversations as a team, but even on the floor while they were playing, what eye contact meant and how they could communicate with each other on the floor while competing. And it started, though, when they were having their day-to-day conversations in the locker room and in the hallway and in the offices, that she would talk about eye contact in a very purposeful way. It's, again, something we don't really think about, but it's something that happens every day. She also would talk about body language and how important different types of body language was in shaping interactions with teams. So those are examples that I'll share with you. As you think about targeting high doses, think about how you have experienced that in very positive ways and how you might do it better. Thanks for your time with the video.